I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 105 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, November 29, 2022. The committee is resuming its study of Canada's electricity grid and network. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. All witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order the best we can. I'll be using these two cards to give you a warning. 30 seconds, time's up with the red card, but I will try not to interrupt you mid-sentence. Now I'd like to welcome our witnesses with us today. From the Canada West Foundation, Dr. Colleen Collins, Vice President by video conference. From Clean Energy Canada, Evan Pivnik, Program Manager, Clean Energy. From the David Suzuki Foundation, Stephen Thomas, Clean Energy Manager. From Energy for a Secure Future, Shannon Joseph, Chair. And from Environmental Defence Canada, Keith Brooks, Programs Director by video conference. So you'll have up to 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and we will begin with Dr. Collins from the Canada West Foundation. The floor is yours.
I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to participate in your study today. The Canada West Foundation is an independent, nonpartisan public policy think tank that specifically focuses on matters that matter most to the West. We advance pragmatic policies based on research and convening, as well as we educate Canadians on these issues. Your committee is tasked with the study of Canada's electricity system. This is no small undertaking, precisely because there is no Canadian electricity system. Our country has 10 provincial systems, and I'll focus on the West. My first point is that electricity generation and intra-provincial transmission fall clearly within provincial jurisdiction, so it is quite interesting to participate in a study by House of Commons committee on this topic. Western provinces have raised serious concerns that unilateral federal action through policies such as the Impact Assessment Act and the Clean Electricity Regulations run afoul of the Constitution. And in the Impact Assessment decision, you'll recall that the Supreme Court pointedly reminded the federal government of provincial responsibility for electricity. Electricity generation that is reliable, affordable, and clean is the objective of every provincial government and system operator. However, because an issue is important across the nation does not mean that it is an issue of national concern to be unilaterally addressed by the federal government. Provinces are taking actions to achieve these goals in ways that are consistent with the diverse nature of their resource endowments, geography, and system choices, and they are cooperating with their neighbors where it makes sense. In July 2023, Canada West Foundation released a report that described the diverse electricity landscape across the West. It is available on our website, cwf.ca. So as a committee, I'm sure you will ask, what is the appropriate role for the federal government? Clearly, it is not to create uncertainty that limits investments in both emitting and non-emitting generation through clean electricity regs, which are unnecessary, unattainable, unaffordable, and unconstitutional, as Alberta and Saskatchewan have demonstrated. Or to create uncertainty through delayed implementation for promised investment tax credits and other uncertainties concerning carbon contracts for differences. Electricity is a system. Actions on one part have implications for others, and those implications differ in different provinces. Policies that may benefit Canada on average can have very negative consequences in some provinces, as shown by research by the Canada West Foundation.
Pardon, question de règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Ms. Collins, I'll ask you to just pause for a second.
Je pense qu'on a un problème d'interprétation. La connexion de Mme Collins n'est pas suffisamment efficace pour que les interprètes puissent faire leur travail, je crois.
We have a problem of connection. Ms. Collins' connection is, I believe, not good enough for interpretation.
And for a moment, just to check with interpretation to make sure everything is okay, just hold and we'll be back in a moment. We will suspend. So we will try to continue, but if we cannot get, it doesn't stabilize and we can't hear you, then we may have to proceed to another speaker, but we will advise accordingly. I'm so sorry, my apologies. Please continue, and hopefully we can get through this without any further disruptions.
The Supreme Court determined that where federal and provincial responsibilities overlap, each order of government should stay in their own lane, related to their heads of powers, and work together through cooperative federalism to achieve their goals. This doesn't only make constitutional sense, it also makes practical sense, especially for complex systems like electricity under very diverse conditions. Regulations and funding programs that don't consider the realities on the ground will be counterproductive. There's much to be gained through true cooperation, but to be sure, consultation is not the same thing. Second, if we consider interprovincial interties as an example of an area within federal jurisdiction, a map of electricity generation and emissions across the West suggests an obvious idea. Ship zero-emission hydroelectricity from the bookends of BC and Manitoba to Alberta and Saskatchewan. However, as your committee studies the system in more depth, you will find that BC and Manitoba simply don't have spare ongoing baseload electricity to send to Alberta and Saskatchewan. In 2023, BC actually imported more electricity from the US and Alberta than they exported. And even with Site C coming online at the end of the year, BC will soon face supply shortages. Manitoba is also facing somewhat similar situations due to the drought, and they too have issued a call for major new renewable generation. You will also discover that Alberta provided 92% of Canada's new renewable storage capacity in 2023. Without its own major hydroelectricity resources or consistent supply from BC, wind and solar have developed precisely because the resources exist and there is natural gas to provide baseload power.
Ms. Collins, I just ask you to wrap up, please. We are at time, so if you have a concluding sentence or two.
As Western provinces seek opportunities to increase reliability, affordability, and sustainability, there is a role for the federal government to use its spending power in cooperation with the provinces to support emissions reduction that suit their individual conditions. Thank you.
We'll now go to Keith Brooks from Environmental Defence Canada. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. Keith Brooks with Environmental Defence. It's our view that it's absolutely essential to fully decarbonize Canada's electricity grid by 2035. A clean grid is the backbone of the energy transition. The pathway to a net zero economy, simply put, is achieved by electrifying as many energy end uses as possible, fully decarbonizing the electricity grid, achieving all available conservation and efficiency, and then finally dealing with those hardest to abate sectors. Electric vehicle adoption, cold climate heat pumps, electric arc furnaces are examples of the electrification of end uses, but these solutions only realize their full potential if we have a fully decarbonized grid. 100% clean and renewable grid is entirely achievable, and especially so in a country like Canada. Many countries have already accomplished this. Many more, including all of Canada's G7 allies, have committed to it. and few countries are in a better position than Canada to achieve it. We have abundant wind, water, and solar resources. Canada's grid is already 84% non-emitting, and the federal government has a clear role to play here in getting our nation the rest of the way there. As usual, this can be accomplished through a targeted use of both carrots and sticks, that is, federal support for a more resilient and interconnected electricity grid and robust federal clean electricity regulations to deliver on the Prime Minister's commitment to get Canada to a net zero grid by 2035. The good news is that renewable energy is the cheapest source of new electricity generation in the world. Wind power is the cheapest source of new electricity generation in much, if not all, of Canada today. Wind power projects have and will continue to outcompete new gas and nuclear power projects, hands down. Solar power prices have been and are expected to continue to drop dramatically, and solar is expected to be the cheapest source of new power in Canada within this decade, or so the next decade, rather. We already have well-developed hydropower resources across the country, and companies are looking to augment those by tapping tidal power, wave power, to add to what is already a robust amount of renewable baseload. The knock on renewables, of course, or wind and solar in particular, is that they're intermittent. The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and though this is true, energy storage technologies are evolving quickly alongside renewable energy and firming up these intermittent resources at costs that are very reasonable. For example, in the province of Ontario, they recently completed the procurement of what they call capacity resources. These are resources that are not baseload, not expected to be generating all the time, but are there to add capacity when needed. The province opened the procurement to gas plants as well as battery energy storage systems, and the battery systems came in at 40% of the costs of the gas plant on a per megawatt basis. Yes, the gas plants can run a bit longer, but even if you doubled the capacity of the battery systems, they would still be cheaper than gas. Hydropower can also act to firm up wind and solar. Hydro plant operators can generate more or less electricity based on demand and based on what other renewable sources are contributing. But the federal government does have a role to play in adding further resiliency and reliability to the grid by taking action to ensure the provincial and territorial grids are connected into a national network. This recommendation has been made by the Canadian Climate Institute, by the Canada Electricity Advisory Council, and is noted by bodies like the International Energy Agency, who recommended that the Government of Canada work with the provinces and the electricity industry to facilitate greater east-west connectivity between Canada's electricity networks and greater integration of Canada's electricity markets more general. I would add that we would also want to see more integration with territories and the territorial grids. Two main mechanisms to achieve this is for the federal government to use its convening power and to fund projects to facilitate interconnection and get the provinces to see themselves as part of a national grid and network. This need is clear and the federal role has been clearly identified, and we recommend the government get moving on this without further delay. And I'll note that progress in Atlantic Canada on the maritime link suggests the federal government has already taken this advice on board and is moving forward to implement it, but more still is needed, and perhaps especially to help prairie provinces that are presently overly reliant on fossil fuel generation. Alberta and Saskatchewan have some of the best wind and solar resources in Canada, but they would benefit from greater connectivity to other provinces and territories that have robust hydropower resources. The other key piece of the puzzle, as noted above, is that with the guarantee of greater interprovincial and territorial connectivity and resilience, the government should bring forward strong clean electricity regulations. Countries around the world are building renewable power at an incredible pace, but here in Canada, we're moving comparatively slowly due to the regulatory uncertainty at the federal level. We're still waiting for the final federal regulations, and in the meantime, some provinces are going backwards by introducing policies that make building a new renewable energy very challenging. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now go to Evan Pivnik from Clean Energy Canada. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah. Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Evan Pivnik. I'm the Clean Energy Program Manager for Clean Energy Canada, which is a climate and energy think tank that's run out of Simon Fraser University. Today, I'm here to talk about Canada's clean electricity opportunities and the pivotal role it plays in enhancing our competitiveness, protecting affordability, and ensuring the energy security of Canadians. The choices we make today about how we grow, modernize, and decarbonize our electricity grid will profoundly impact our economic prosperity for decades to come. Globally, the world is electrifying. Of the $3 trillion US in expected global energy investment this year, $2 trillion of that will flow into clean energy technologies and infrastructure. The IEA expects that by 2050, in a net zero scenario, electricity will be meeting more than half of the world's energy needs. It's not just electricity in general, but clean electricity specifically that countries are seeing as a strategic imperative. From hydro to nuclear to renewables backed by energy efficiency and energy storage, non-emitting technologies are increasingly the priority. Across the world, fossil fuel demand for electricity has peaked in 95% of OECD countries and is now in decline. The share of electricity demand being met by renewables has been growing exponentially, expanding from roughly 20% in 2015 to an expected 38% by 2027. Even under existing policy, 80% of new power generation added globally by 2030 is expected to come from renewables. While global climate policy certainly plays a role in driving electrification, that's far from the only factors. The falling prices of key clean energy technologies, increasing demands for electricity from households and industry, and the rising importance of energy security in the face of global conflicts are all significant drivers. Here at home, clean electricity presents opportunities for Canada that we should be moving quickly to embrace. First, clean electricity offers Canada a major competitive advantage in a global economy that's increasingly preferring low-carbon goods and services. As ally countries like the EU and US consider moving forward with carbon border adjustments to keep out higher carbon goods and exports of clean energy rise in importance, our ability to power our economy with clean electricity will become an imperative. Choosing to delay the deployment of clean electricity is choosing to allow investment that could come to Canada to go elsewhere. Second, clean electricity and the clean energy solutions that plug into it can improve household affordability. A recent report by Clean Energy Canada looked at Alberta and Ontario and found that as of 2023, wind power was already able to produce electricity at lower cost than natural gas. Another study of ours due out in the next few weeks will show that deploying just a few clean energy solutions like EVs and heat pumps powered by electricity can help families across the country save hundreds of dollars a month on their energy bills. At a time when cost of living concerns dominate the national conversation, clean electricity can be an important part of that solution. Finally, building out domestically produced clean electricity and electrifying our economy will enhance Canada's energy security. Global actions have an impact on the prices we pay here at home. Just last week, we saw global oil prices fall to a 3-year low, in large part due to the surging EV adoption we're seeing in China. Enabling Canadian households and industries to plug into homegrown Canadian clean electricity enables them to benefit from predictable electricity prices that are regulated provincially, as opposed to being exposed to geopolitically driven fossil fuel price swings. Canada has a significant head start with a grid that is already more than 80% clean. But as laid out in the final report of the Independent Clean Electricity Advisory Council, the twin challenges Canada must overcome are to decarbonize our electricity grid while simultaneously expanding it to meet the growing demand for electricity we face. There are many reasons for optimism that we can conquer these challenges. Over the last 3 years, nearly every province in the country has identified clean electricity as a key competitive advantage and has begun to take steps to decarbonize and grow their respective electricity grids. The problem isn't the direction, it's the speed at which we're moving. Here, the federal government has a vital role to play in urgently capitalizing on our country's clean electricity opportunity. Specifically, Clean Energy Canada recommends the federal government drive ambition through setting clear targets and developing flexible regulations that address carbon pollution and help natural gas to be a resource of last resort. Provide funding at the scale required to decarbonize our existing system and deploy new clean electricity resources needed to meet growing demand. And support the uptake of household clean energy technologies like EVs and heat pumps that help unlock cost savings and enhance our energy security. The competitiveness of our economy, the affordability of electricity, and the security of energy supply depends on the federal government being an active partner. As others have said, the direction of change is inevitable, but the speed, that's up to us. Thank you so much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And I just want to remind, yellow's 30-second warning, red is time's up, just to make sure you don't stop early. Okay, we'll go to Mr. Stephen Thomas from the David Suzuki Foundation. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. First, I'd like to acknowledge the unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory on which this conversation is taking place. And of course, I would like to thank the chair, the vice chairs, and the members of the committee for their time on this important topic today. My name is Stephen Thomas. I'm the Clean Energy Manager with the David Suzuki Foundation. The foundation's been a part of convening, active in research, and working on the issues of electricity and renewables for more than 30 years. And we welcome the opportunity to contribute some of our more recent research and views to this committee's work on electricity. Today, we see an exciting opportunity before us in the shared work of upgrading Canada's electricity system to meet this moment, to prepare for a competitive, secure energy future, and to ensure affordable, reliable, clean electricity for Canadian households along the way. This moment requires that Canada be thoughtful and strategic in approaches to the electricity system, which is why we commend the work of this committee in exploring pathways, technologies, frameworks, and approaches. The challenge of meeting growing electricity demand and the changing nature of electricity production and consumption is considerable, and it's why we need a plan. But the benefits are also considerable when it comes to the affordability of energy for everyone, for better health outcomes for ourselves and for our kids, to economic competitiveness and security, to opportunities for Indigenous self-determination and energy sovereignty, to jobs and benefits for workers. Clean electricity has a lot to offer. But along the way, we must ask important questions like who benefits and how can we maximize the benefits for families, communities, and in the Indigenous nations on whose land this electricity transformation takes place. We recognize and lift up that we are having this conversation as multiple crises are affecting Canadians, including the crisis of affordability and the climate crisis itself. The International Energy Agency, as already mentioned, has made itself quite clear for years that if the world is to be on a path that avoids the worst impacts of climate change, this sort of work on decarbonizing electricity is what's needed for a developed country like Canada, in particular the 2035 target for net zero electricity. This is why Canada's allies in the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, Italy, Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, and more, have all committed to decarbonizing their electricity systems by that 2035 year or sooner. This is also why we were pleased to see the federal government commit to the clean electricity regulations and to its G7 commitments on electricity. This target is feasible here in Canada, and we look forward to the real work of collaborating on pathways to achieve these goals. Canada has done important work like this before. Throughout 2016, 17, and 18, Canada developed and finalized federal regulations for the electricity sector to phase out coal-fired electricity by the year 2030. There were many tough conversations then, as there are now, but ultimately workers, utilities, system operators, provinces, and other stakeholders came together to deliver these pathways that are able to deliver affordable, reliable electricity without burning coal. Alberta is already meeting this target 7 years early, and Nova Scotia is accelerating its pathway to phasing out coal, primarily as a cost-saving measure as the cost of fossil fuels spike. Regulations and policy clarity were important then, as they are important now. I have a number of recommendations which we've provided to the committee in our brief, but to summarize them in terms of topic, we do feel the importance of this policy clarity with something like the clean electricity regulations, and also the federal government's role and its convening power when it comes to pulling together provinces, regulators, utilities, and other stakeholders for increasing electricity system planning collaboration and to find aligned priorities and strategies for cross-jurisdiction transmission infrastructure. A plan for this convening should be considered in this study and in the Natural Resources Canada's upcoming Canada Electricity Strategy. From our recommendations, we'll also just lift up the importance of this interprovincial transmission piece as a key role for the federal government to convene, to help plan, and to fund. Many of the remarks today that I'm making here with you all today have drawn on some of our more recent research and reports. Those two have been submitted, and I'm happy to speak to those in detail here. Thanks again for your time. That's all.
Thank you. We'll now go to Shannon Joseph from Energy for a Secure Future. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Merci, chers membres du comité, pour...
Thank you to the committee members for giving me the opportunity to speak for you today. Energy for Secure Future is a civil society objective with two objectives: to promote a conversation in Canada with the energy security with all allies in the world, and secondly, to do research on the transformation of energy systems in order to propose a pathway for Canada which will allow us to reduce our emissions and to be prosperous.
Getting Canada's Energy Future Right, a consumer lens on energy in Canada, author Mike Cleland examined stationary end-use energy in Canada between 2005 and 2022. He also looked at the Canadian Energy Regulator's 2023 net zero scenario and implications for Canada's electricity system and end-use energy nationally. And I'd like to highlight a few considerations. First, it is important to have a framework for evaluating the merits of different energy policies to guide decision-making. And our report suggests the following framework. Number one, it has to deliver on energy fundamentals: affordability, reliability, safety, security, and resilience. It must have social acceptability. This is a country where, Ontario gets 60% of its electricity from nuclear, and in another province, British Columbia, nuclear power generation was banned by legislation in 2010. And finally, of course, the system has to deliver on our environmental goals. Solving for these three together is a challenge, but I would suggest that the shaky support for many climate policies in the country reflects the fact that many of the policies were developed without adequate attention to energy fundamentals, which always reassert themselves. A second consideration needs to be the current energy mix in Canada. Today, electricity provides 22% of stationary end-use energy. And if you include transportation, then it's less than 20%. So when we're talking about replacing 70 to 80% of the energy currently used in Canada with the CER's combination of new electricity, new fuels, and the elimination of about 50% of demand, this is not a fast or low-cost proposition, especially in a country that has taken over 10 years to build 1 gigawatt Site C dam. A final consideration is how energy is used and the possibilities for substitution. In Canada, 67% of end-use energy is industrial. This includes manufacturing, agriculture, mining, etc. In some provinces like Alberta, industrial energy use represents 80% of energy end use, stationary energy end use. Industry's use of energy is what creates jobs, drives our international trade, and underpins our quality of life. Today, the majority of this industrial energy is not electricity. It is refined petroleum products and natural gas. These energy choices are driven by the nature of the industrial activity. And even in the CER's net zero scenario, natural gas and refined petroleum products still make up a larger share of industrial energy use than electricity. It is worth noting that the increased electricity use and the use of emerging fuels envisioned in that scenario is energy that currently does not exist. So when one examines what the CER proposes for changes to all end-use energy in Canada, combined with our other national goals of population growth, reshoring of manufacturing, becoming a player in AI, we are talking about the doubling or tripling of our current electricity system and related infrastructure. And while this may be theoretically possible to do in 25 years, assuming we overcome issues around availability of skilled labor, material supply chains, and regulatory approvals on the required scale, who pays remains the big question, where both households and businesses will have a limit to their ability to pay. And we don't have a lot of good answers on this. So a couple of recommendations. Number one, solve for the trilemma. As political decision makers, you need to answer to the public for energy fundamentals, the acceptability issues, and the environment. Number two, start by producing more electricity. We don't have enough electricity today. In 2023, as was mentioned, BC was about 2 Site C dams short of electricity. In Quebec, in winter, Hydro-Quebec reported that they're about 3 Site C dams short. So before we ban natural gas home heating or the internal combustion engine, let's make more power available, see what it takes to do that, see how those costs are absorbed, and then keep going. And finally, the issue is emissions, so let's focus on emissions. We have a lot of gas infrastructure in Canada. We have poor space for carbon capture. Leveraging existing assets will bend the cost curve and buy us time to build those new systems while preserving energy security and affordability. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll now proceed to our first round of questions, and we'll start with Mr. Dreeshen for 6 minutes. Mr. Dreeshen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses. First, I'd like to talk to Ms. Collins with Canada West. There was a discussion, as what you had indicated, resource determination, diverse electricity landscape. These are provincial regulations, provincial resources, and we of course have the issue of federal government encroaching in that area. So you had talked about some of the things that had happened as far as the Supreme Court is concerned. I wonder if you could start off with that, and then I'll have some other questions.
Certainly, thank you.
Ms. Collins, can you turn your camera on, please, for interpretation? Yes. Or there you go. There you go.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. You know, my point is that you have to start from the point of the constitutional positions of the role of electricity in this country being provincial jurisdiction. Unless we're prepared to change the Constitution here, and I think we might have other areas where we might start, we start there.
Ms. Collins.
The second thing is that
Ms. Collins, sorry, we're having challenges with your connection. Interpreters are having a hard time being able to interpret with the breakup. So I pause your time, Mr. Dreeshen. So what we will do is, if you could provide a brief, you're able to provide a brief to the committee on anything that you may have missed today, and so we can continue on with the meeting. So I'm going to go back to Mr. Dreeshen. Mr. Dreeshen, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And perhaps I'll direct this question to Ms. Joseph. We did make the transition from coal to gas. And there was a lot of effort done to make sure that happened. But then the government and other groups start moving the goalposts. So therefore, now we have to get rid of gas. We have to go back into these other areas. And you talked about, the need for 4 more, basically 4 more Site C dams if we wish to come anywhere close. I don't imagine building dams in Canada is any more easy to get through the folks than building more gas plants. So I think that's one of the problems. And of course, if you also look at the doubling of and tripling of the infrastructure that is required, we're talking right now about how you can transfer it across provinces and how you can get the energy from one spot to the other. But then you are also talking about how are you going to get it into communities, how are you going to get it into homes, and we've heard people talk about doubling or tripling the cost that would be required to make that happen. So then the big question becomes, who pays? So right now we demonize big oil. So eventually it will be big wind and it'll be big sun because there will be billions of dollars being made in that industry. So they're going to be the ones that are paying. They're also going to be the ones that are going to be filling their pockets with a lot of money from this. So I wonder if you could just kind of talk about how we can transition through this in a logical fashion so that we can assist in getting electrification to where it needs to be, but stop this demonizing of what we have. And the only way that you'll ever get things to happen is if you cut out oil and gas.
Thank you. So I would echo the comments made by Ms. Collins around really trying to respect and let the provinces lead in terms of the approach to transforming electricity systems, because they have the strongest sense of where they're starting from and what some of the local lessons learned have been. I think that, when I hear we have to electrify everything as soon as possible, there's a real risk of asymmetry between the load going up and the supply not being available to meet it. And at the end of the day, I'll give the example of Hydro-Quebec. They've announced plans to spend between $152 and $185 billion to enhance their electricity system. Somebody has to pay for that. And you multiply that across the country, and it's very significant. And again, for the current needs we have and the current end use we have, we don't have enough electricity. So we need to start building more, absorbing those costs, and taking further steps.
One of the other things you had also spoken of is the stationary end use that is required. And so this is where you generally have an industry that is compact, and it's easy then to move that energy around. So one of the options, of course, is small modular reactors. And there again, you're going to find the same group of people that don't like anything else that are also going to be against that. So that again becomes one of the issues. But when you think that we need to have industry, that's the thing that is going to pay for all of these things. So there has to be a balance. How do you think that governments can look at that balance? Somewhere along the line, you have to simply say to those that don't want to see any development that's other than, and I'm curious as to how they think it's going to work, but how that is going to come to fruition.
Yeah, I think, the CER estimates we need to get from 152 gigawatts of capacity to 350 gigawatts. So this is massive, massive. And again, if we are not able to manage how those costs pour out to either the ratepayer or the taxpayer, we're going to have serious competitiveness issues because those things have to be paid for, assuming we have the labor, et cetera. So I think, sequencing these things and having them locally driven, allowing the provinces to work with industry, with, communities, mayors, municipalities on how to pace things, I think it's going to be vitally important.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now proceed to Mr. Johari for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to welcome all our witnesses, both online and in person here. Thank you for focusing on this. I'm going to start my line of questioning from Clean Energy Canada, and I want to point to a report that came out in February of 2023, Renewable Powerhouse, titled as new research finds the wind and solar power with battery storage is set to produce cheaper electricity than natural gas in Alberta and Ontario. And I think, Mr. Pivnik, you briefly touched in your opening remarks about the potential. Currently, it's cheaper, but it's going to go further down. Can you quickly touch on that before I go to some sort of recommendation that I'm trying to get clarification on?
Absolutely. I think this report came about because when we look right around the world, wind and solar is by far the cheapest way that you can generate electricity today. So our premise was, how can we maximize that role? And that starts with understanding what those costs are here in Canada. Right now, we're heavily reliant on studies out of the US to tell us what are those capital costs, what are those operating costs. So we went in this study looking at Ontario, looking at Alberta, where we have seen significant renewable development. We went in and said, let's go talk to companies, let's look at the research, and let's build Canadian-based cost estimates for what this costs us so that we can have an informed conversation about how we can get renewables to be as much of a role as they will be. Most studies point in a net zero Canada, 30 to 40% could be coming from renewables. How do we ensure we're able to achieve that? How do we ensure we can maximize the role of the cheapest way we can generate electricity, especially if others have pointed out that we've got a very significant build out to occur in a short period of time?
Yeah, so 30 to 40% is going to come renewable, and leading renewable naturally is solar and wind. And what is the pricing? How do you see the price compared to, let's say, for gas?
Yeah, I think in every single jurisdiction, you're going to have slightly different prices. Right now, you're looking at wind and solar being able to come somewhere between 5 and 10 cents a kilowatt hour. When you look at natural gas, again, probably up into, certain natural gas at times can be around the same price or upwards above 10 cents into 15 cents. When we look at this full picture, though, we're talking about needing the full suite of options available to us. Renewables are where we need to start and to think about from how do we maximize the cheapest available, and then look at how do we address the other pieces, because reliability, security, this is the only way this build out is going to work.
So, Madam Shannon, Joseph talked about the way I understood that we need to look at gas as a bridge until we figure out many other things, including skills, including having the right skill set, having the right investment, having the right model of being able to finance all of this thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Sorry.
I'm asking. Yeah. Can you repeat the question again? Well, man, Shannon, you want to Shannon, you want to answer that?
Well, I think that, there are reports that have come out. Basically, the infrastructure you don't have to build is free. And we have a lot of infrastructure that can be leveraged in terms of the gas infrastructure, into which you could blend hydrogen and other things. But at least you have something delivering while you're building up what needs to be lots of additional capacity on the electricity side. And if you can use this while you do something else, it lowers the cost because you didn't have to build something else. That's what I mean.
So to me, that's a bridging.
Sure.
Correct. That's a bridging and looking. Okay, there's an aspect of that at some point, once you build that capacity, there needs to be decommissioning, and then you're left with a certain asset. What are your thoughts on that one?
As long as you can deliver on your energy fundamentals, sure. Right? Like we can, those systems will be decommissioned when the new system can deliver what it's supposed to. And there's a long road there, as I said, where it's like the CER's at 130% increase in our electricity. We're just starting.
So you're suggesting the timing would be such as when we are starting commissioning, then we are sunsetting some of the others.
The sequencing of that will be determined by the utilities who are responsible for safety.
Going back to Clean Energy Canada, you had I believe you had four recommendations in your report. And I'd like to actually focus on the second recommendation, which specifically says send the right signal and create policy certainty. And I want to touch about policy certainty and get your point of view. And I think Dr. Collins also touched about the need for policy certainty. Can you share what you mean by policy certainty and what can we do specifically as a recommendation? Think about this. At the end of this report, we're going to put a recommendation, and one of those recommendations has to be policy certainty. And how would that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainty when it comes to this, and especially with the scale of investment we're talking about, is absolutely essential. And that's everything from the investment and fiscal instruments the federal government uses to the regulations it sends. So clear, proactive publication of those when it comes to ITCs, making sure the rules are clear, that everyone knows exactly what's required in order to make sure capital can move. When it comes to pollution regulations, making sure that the details are clear, that they've been well developed, that they're flexible to meet jurisdictions, but that more than anything else, we're clear about where we're going. And the clearest one from a signal perspective is what we see from provinces. We have almost every province in the country has set net zero as a clear target. That provides an anchor for where we're needing to go, and that certainty is essential.
Thank you. We'll now go to Monsieur Simard for 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you. I think Ms. Collins is no longer there. I don't see her, but I wanted to go back to something she said when she spoke about the fact that there is no electrical network currently deployed throughout Canada. And this is really under the jurisdiction of the provinces. So I agree with her completely. But if that applies to electricity grids, it should also happen for other pipeline networks. So if a province decides to not go ahead with a pipeline, you've already heard the Conservatives say that it should be an agreement about a pipeline that would go towards Quebec. But if there's no accepting the pipeline, I think the same kind of logic could apply. I don't know if Ms. Collins could tell us about this.
Difficulties with Ms. Collins to
Elle
be able
pourra
to
nous
answer,
répondre par
but
écrit.
we
Elle pourra
can
nous répondre par
have
écrit aussi.
Ms. Collins, any questions you do get, if you don't mind noting them, and then you can provide a written response
Merci.
to committee
Merci.
on that specific question.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Merci. Madame Joseph,
Excellent, thank you. Ms. Joseph, you mentioned the difficulties experienced in Quebec at peak hours. I think you referred to that. I don't know if you know, but those peak hours in Quebec, it's less than 6 days a year. So for 6 days a year, we have to really make a huge effort to find solutions. But what made the Quebec government went from an electrical surplus to a deficit are the sales that they accepted to make to the U.S., and also the fact that a majority of large businesses want to come to Quebec to benefit from clean energy. And I'm telling you that, in my opinion, this is a clear signal that current industrialization is happening with clean energy. So if an economy like Canada's economy doesn't take that pathway, we won't be attractive for large businesses. And I'm not just talking about the battery companies. Same thing for aluminum, which makes us the envy of the world. The aluminum smelters in Quebec, that they can take advantage of clean energies. And now the electrical grids in Quebec are so in such demand that we have to make decisions on where to attribute it. So it seems clear that in the Western industrial world, there's a demand for clean energy sources and not energy sources derived from gas and oil. Do you agree with me? Yes. My comment was that if the Quebec government has a lack, I saw it said 21,000 megawatts, they had to reject businesses because they didn't have enough energy. What's important is how will we be creating that energy in the provinces and everywhere in Canada? How much will it cost and how will it be transmitted to the businesses? So it's a similar logic here. But because we are making a report, I would like to bring to your attention the fact that the majority of countries in the West are trying to reduce their carbon footprint in terms of energy. And if Canada does not find a strategy that allows it to free itself of gasoline and oil, so we will no longer be, or gas and oil, will no longer be competitive in the future. Do you agree with this? No, I don't agree with this. Because if we look at what's happening in the West, the experience in Germany, where there's a huge increase of renewable energy production, they also saw a decrease of industrial productivity in their country for 2 consecutive years because those industries left to move to the U.S. No. Because the majority of their industries are looking for clean energy. We see people arriving in Germany. American companies such as BASF is trying to install themselves in Canada because they want to use clean energy. The big challenge for Germany is that they're not able to provide clean energy on the short term. And I can guarantee this. I did a mission with Minister Wilkinson, where I met a lot of large industries that need a lot of energy, who are looking at clean energy and are ready to move their companies. So if Canada just concentrates on oil and gas in the near future, we'll have the same problems. These large businesses prefer doing business with countries that have gone through the energy transition and are able to produce to provide that kind of energy. Do you agree with this? I believe that the data shows that many people have lost industries to the U.S., and it's because of the incentives in the U.S. And yes, people want to have a good performance in terms of energy, but they also want to make a lot of money. And for reasons that I've mentioned, they've chosen the U.S., and we have to pay attention to that when we make investments in Canada. So why have these businesses chosen Quebec? They're asking for energy from Quebec, and they're not asking to go install themselves in Alberta, where low-cost energy would be abundant. Why are these businesses not making those choices if it's not because they deem that having a high-carbon energy source will not be good for them? I agree with you. They want to do that, but they also want to make money, and they don't. Their choice is not only based on that factor. Thank you.
Indeed, to Mr. Angus for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Last month, one of the largest lobby groups for the electricity industry started running advertising and we're warning, this is Electricity Canada warning about catastrophic conditions if we fixed up our electricity regulations and pushed to get to cleaner energy. They were predicting brownouts and disasters, and God, my friend Earl's talking about the dangers of big sun. Mr. Thomas, you accused them of a misinformation campaign. That's a pretty bold language. And you said it's disappointing to see an industry association like Electricity Canada employ such misleading rhetoric because its fossil fuel powered members are delaying the transition to clean energy. What do you mean by that?
Thank you. It is. It's disappointing to see an industry association show up in that way in a conversation about where things are headed in Canada on our electricity future. And more confusing for me because Electricity Canada as an entity has so many members who themselves are already entirely clean electricity providers or have committed themselves to produce clean electricity by 2035 or another date. So if I were those members of that association, I would be embarrassed. When it comes to the kind of misinformation or inflammatory language that we see in their ad campaign, it's more along that language of blackouts and brownouts and cost, and we just don't know what numbers they're using to make those claims. When it comes to the clean electricity regulations, when it comes to the research that we've been a part of, we see that as we move to a cleaner electricity system, we move to a cheaper electricity system, and the cost of energy on the whole for households goes down as we electrify, and as we move to clean electricity too.
Well, thank you. Because one of the things that really shocked me, I mean, Ontario used to be a hydro superpower. I mean, of course, Kathleen Wynne helped to sell off, and Doug Ford nailed it into the ground. But Ontario is now complaining that if we bring in clean electricity regulations, it'll be a catastrophe for them, and they need until 2050 in order to meet this. That seems to be staggeringly lazy, given what I'm seeing all over the world. We've seen a huge revolution in clean tech, Texas, California, all over Europe, and yet Ontario saying, don't give us any rules that make us actually improve. What is it that we have such dismal standards? Do you think that it's realistic to say to an energy superpower like Ontario, don't bother cleaning up until 2050?
So at the David Suzuki Foundation, our research tells us and informs our view that moving to clean electricity is good for the places that do that work. That's true for Ontario. That's true for everywhere in Canada. It's true that different provinces have different levels of work to do. We have different starting points, and I think that too is where the federal government can help with provinces on their varying pathways to this clean electricity target and this clean electricity future. It was great and encouraging for us to see that the federal government and the government of Nova Scotia reached a common understanding on the clean electricity regulations. That too is a province that depends an awful lot on coal, and sees the value in cleaning up its electricity system. So in Ontario and elsewhere, we see the value.
We could do better. I mean, certainly if our Liberal government ever got their investment tax credits out of whatever department they're hiding in, we would certainly see a huge revolution. We haven't seen anything yet. Mr. Pivnik, I wanted to ask you because, you know, you don't often get to see an economic revolution happening before your face. But within the last year, we've seen staggering increases in EV battery storage capacity, solar capacity. We've seen countries go from 0 to 100 in staggering times. Again, jurisdictions like California now going many days just on clean energy. Texas, where they got less people who believe in climate change than the Conservative caucus, are doing that. How do you see the potential for Canada? Like, are we going to sit on the sidelines while the rest of the world moves ahead, while Europe moves ahead? What is the potential here in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's entirely up to the choices governments, both provincial and certainly the federal government, makes around the level of ambition we put on this. We keep talking about costs with net zero, and there's no question that doubling our grid in in 25 years to achieve net zero is a cost or has a cost associated with it, but it's also should be viewed as an opportunity for Canada to choose to be competitive in a world that's trying to achieve net zero. And when you look across the world, you've got nearly 150 countries covering 90% of global CO2 emissions that have lined up to achieve that target as well, and they're accelerating. So the choice for Canada is, do we want to be part of that? Do we want to try and secure the investments from that? We've seen some of those coming and landing with some of the choices that we've made in the battery supply chain. There's incredible opportunities right across the country. Alberta's got to have one of the best opportunities to be a player in this of any jurisdiction.
I mean, we were born on third base when it comes to energy potential. And now we're saying, oh, it's going to be too hard to get to 2050. Oh, my God, give us a break. While the rest of the world that doesn't have nearly what we have are going there. So what does it say? I mean, we started out with 85% clean grid. To get to that other 15% shouldn't be that difficult. Can we do it?
Yeah, I absolutely think we can, and I think the Clean Electricity Advisory Council made it clear that we have to tackle two challenges at the same time. The first is that decarbonization of the remaining 15%, as you said. The second is to double, and the choices we make in the investments and how we look to do that is the other part of that equation.
Thank you. Thank you. Colleagues, we'll move to our next round. I'm hoping to get through the first four by the time we get to the end of our allotted time for today's meeting. So we'll go to Mr. Falk for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for your presentations. Ms. Joseph, I'll start with you. It was mentioned earlier that the cost of wind and solar is 5 to 10 cents, gas 10 to 15 cents. Is that per kilowatt or kilowatt hour? What would that be?
You know, I was impressed by the numbers some of the colleagues spoke to. I guess, you know, what I think is important is a lot of times those numbers don't include the full cost of transmission for energy, which is going to be very distributed. It doesn't include the cost of storage. It doesn't include the cost of dispatchable power. You know, we spoke earlier about those utilities and why are they, you know, saying all these mean things. Today, you know, a lot of the renewables in Alberta are backed up by dispatchable gas plants, and they sit idle. And when they come on, it's a premium cost. And I don't know that there are batteries much cheaper than that. But the point is, like, I don't know that this is cheap, and we shouldn't discuss it as if it's cheap. There's a lot of things to build. There's a lot of things that don't exist yet.
What is the cheapest form of energy to produce?
Right now, the cheapest electricity is natural gas. But maybe it's hydro. I don't want to get into necessarily the competition. I think different energy sources are affordable in different applications, and we have to use what's best to achieve all of our goals, including our environmental goals. So, you know, in Quebec, it might be very cheap to do hydro in other places, but every new thing you build has to be paid for, and we have to build a lot of new things.
From a capital cost perspective, there's a lot of infrastructure that's needed if we're going to keep up with the demand that we're looking at. From a capital cost investment, which is the cheapest form of energy to produce from just a capital cost, not operational?
I don't have that number, and I don't want to speculate on it. I think it matters where you are.
Okay. This committee did a study probably 6 years ago on electrical interties, and it was determined that even provincially our systems aren't compatible. Have you seen any progress in that respect over the last couple of years?
Well, you know, there are provinces that share electricity today, and you know, Quebec and Newfoundland are an example, Quebec and Ontario are an example. So there are some interties. It's not a huge amount of energy that's shared between them. And again, most provinces don't have enough electricity now. So building a bunch of interties doesn't solve the problem that you don't have the generation. Because again, we're talking about expanding what electricity does in a way that's never happened before.
When you look at all our potential power sources for electricity that exist today, how much capacity do we have that's available, including stuff that's parked?
What the capacity that's available in terms of new build is not close to 350 gigawatts. Like, it's not close to what we're really talking about in terms of what we would need to build.
The former CEO of Manitoba Hydro says that it would take about 20 years to get a new dam from conception to producing electricity. Is that something that you would agree with?
Well, I would agree with anyone who runs a utility if they tell me how long things take to make.
Okay. And when we look at renewables going forward, can you talk a little bit about reliability and storage?
I mean, today, again, natural gas plays a really important role in wind integration and renewables integration in terms of ensuring grid stability. And, the Canadian Electricity Association had published a report in response to the proposed clean electricity regulations. And they said, we can't ensure reliability, safety, et cetera, without natural gas. And you can't tell us when to get rid of it. We'll get rid of it when it works for us. In Manitoba Hydro put out a pretty detailed study of, moderate to aggressive paths to net zero. In all of them, they need natural gas. And I think we need to be listening to the people whose job it is to provide energy 24/7 to our citizens and ensure safety.
Okay. So is net zero by 2035, is that a realistic goal?
Well, we've never told anyone what the net is on net zero. But what I will say is the CER's numbers to achieve that by 2035, I'm not sure how that could be done without really high burdens of cost to the population and impacts to quality of life and competitiveness.
Okay. And I think probably, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Very much.
We'll now proceed to our next speaker, Mr. Bruson. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I think the conversation is actually pretty interesting because what we're talking about are what the fundamentals are for a clean electrical grid. So, if we're talking about it needs to be clean, it needs to be affordable, it needs to be reliable. And what I'm hearing is people trying to wrestle with those issues. So I thought maybe if I could start with the David Suzuki Foundation. I mean, what essentially I seem to hear from the last bit of evidence from Ms. Joseph is that you can't actually get those three things by 2035 in a net zero scenario. What do you vision when you're thinking about getting to a clean grid? What do we need to do to get there?
Thanks very much. I think the core principle here, we already talked about policy clarity, policy certainty. I think that's one thing that the federal government can provide here.
Do you mind if I interrupt you on that, though?
Sure.
Just to say, what does that look like? Like, if I was actually going to try and get granular, what does that policy certainty look like? Because I'm hearing different things as to what the message should be.
There's a range of things when it comes to funding, actually implementing the ITCs for clean electricity to the federal government, having a very clear policy statement, policy framework for where Canada's headed to grow and clean our electricity system. But it is also regulations. It is a clear policy signal, a clear target, and clear rules in the clean electricity regulations coming out this year. And for us, when we talk about visioning what the grid can look like, we talk a lot about where things are at today, why it's challenging to move forward. But that's the whole point of this work, is looking where the puck is going, not where the puck is today. If I can hazard a hockey quote. So for us, we talk about wind and solar being the cheapest form of electricity in the world and the cheapest form of new power that we can build here in Canada. So maximizing that and creating an electricity framework, electricity systems in provinces that can make the best use of that lowest cost electricity is a priority. And it's also, when it comes to timing, we've also heard a lot in committee today, the long tails, the long timelines that things like large hydro dams or other large bulky electricity systems have, and those things I believe are also true. And that's why wind and solar as modular, shovel-ready projects are also attractive for how quickly we need to build out electricity generation. Wind and solar between 2 and 5 years for a project timeline, depending on the permitting and where things are at. If we're reaching for something that we need to build quickly and need to build cheaply, wind, solar, and energy storage are definitely priorities. And that's another reason why we see energy efficiency and upgrading of the grid more broadly, specifically the transmission system, as other keystones that enable that low-cost electricity to deliver when it's needed.
I only have 2 minutes left. I'm going to cut you there, and actually, if I can go to Mr. Pavnik then with the same question. I mean, if we're trying to get to an affordable, reliable, and clean grid, by 2035. When we're saying policy, or you're saying policy certainty, all that, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I think I'd focus on two specific pieces. So the first one, I completely agree around the ITCs. The idea of the federal government coming in and helping fund this is about ensuring that our progressive tax system can help support the build out of these resources. It will ensure greater equity across the board. It will not be asking the lowest income families to bear the cost of the build out that's required. It will actually be using progressive taxation to do so. ITCs are an incredibly important tool to put into place as quickly as possible. Another specific example would be the SREP program that was spoken to earlier. That could be retooled to focus on demand management more directly. And it can help unlock the distribution level things that at a lowest cost perspective, energy efficiency, distributed resources, this is really a conversation that we're very nascent in and we're very behind in when it comes to Canada. In Ontario with the IESO, they've stood up one of the largest and one of the first pilots of this. They now have the ability to pull the equivalent of Kingston, Ontario off the grid during a peak event. It's 90 megawatts that they can reduce that peak when they are seeing that climb. Those sorts of tools are the ones that we need to be building our grid to optimize if we're really concerned about costs. And I think those are two instruments the federal government should be prioritizing.
Thank you. I think that brings me to 10 seconds, so thanks.
Thank you. We'll now go to Monsieur Simard for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, John.
Thank you. Ms. Joseph, there's something that piqued my curiosity. When you gave the example earlier of Germany, I don't know if you've seen recently this article by the person responsible for the energy transition in Germany, who was saying that there will be less demand for gas if there's an interest for them in Canada. It's hydrogen and critical minerals. So I'm seeing that Western countries are signing up for the transition and their industrial strategies based on that transition. At the same time, you talked about the costs of energy, and I see here a strategy that's being in a place where the fossil energy costs are trying to go down. To pay a huge amount of money for a pipeline is indecent, and until 2005, there was a large amount of money from the government going to support fossil fuel energy. So if they would support cleaner energy, the costs might be lower. Do you agree with what I've said? Mr. Simard, I'm not... Well, if we don't want to use fossil fuel energy, that's great. What's important to me is the pathway we take to undertake the changes in our energy system. They have to be affordable. It has to be reliable. We have to protect our energy security. And if there are countries or places that are more advanced in terms of achieving their objectives, that's fine. I'm happy to hear you speak. I like what you're saying. So if we want to have energy security in Canada, we have to really think about that so that we can be competitive in comparison with other countries. I think we have to think about that. Recently, I've seen people like Suncor saying we're not going to do carbon stockage or carbon storage and capture. We should think that that it's not possible to have gas that has a low carbon intensity. I have no opinion about that. Thank you very much. That's all for me.
I'll go to Mr. Angus for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Brooks two questions. Certainly one of the things that I find when our friends who come to support the fossil fuel industry and inertia, when they compare what we would use besides natural gas or fossil fuels, they always refer to dams, and we know hydroelectric dams are massive, huge projects. Yet California right now, the largest contributor to the California grid, which has a population the size of Canada, is battery power. The battery revolution is massive, both in Texas and California. Now, California is working to go from 8 gigawatts to 42 gigawatts while we're still sitting here talking about it. So I want to ask you about the position that we, with battery, we can, and wind, we are cheaper than natural gas. I want to ask you that. Secondly, that what I also hear from my conservative-minded colleagues that this is all provincial jurisdiction and we should let the provinces do whatever they want. But we are a G7 country. We have G7 obligations and we have signed international commitments. How important is it that we meet those commitments?
Thanks for the question. As I mentioned before, yeah, the batteries here in Ontario are significantly less expensive than a new gas plant. The government issued a contract to want to build a new gas plant in Napanee, and that plan is going to cost $1,680 per megawatt. The battery plants they offered contracts to are going to cost $680 per megawatt, so 40% of the cost. The batteries are significantly less expensive than the gas plants. And Clean Energy Canada did the analysis around this too, that we have wind power paired with batteries. It's going to come in cheaper than gas. And also, we know these prices are going to be set for a long time because we're not like dependent on gas, which is a volatile commodity, the price of which goes up and down based on events that are beyond our control and happen outside of this country. To your question around Canada's international obligations and provinces and whether, I mean, we know some provinces are not on board with the clean electricity regulations. They're not on board with net zero by 2035. And I think the federal government has an obligation not only to do its part as a G7 country, but as a signatory to the Paris Accord, we have an international obligation to be on track for net zero, to meet with the Prime Minister's commitment to a net zero grid by 2035, to reduce our emissions, and not only to meet the targets that this country has set, but to double down on those targets and to hear the calls to action coming from the UN Secretary General, coming from the International Energy Agency, coming from everybody that's watching that this climate crisis is getting worse and worse by the day. We have to do more, and we need the federal government to really exert its power to work within its authority, its constitutional authority, to get all the provinces in line as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. We're at our allotted time for today. It's 6:30. Thank you for the witnesses to providing your testimony and appearing for this study. If you have further written submissions you would like to provide the committee, please send them to the clerk. Thank you, colleagues. We will see you
And thanks
next
to our
week.
chair for managing to get us right down to the minute. So
Right down to the minute.
You do your job.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week, Wednesday, for our next meeting. That concludes our meeting. Meeting adjourned.